Let's head up to the theory board.
Hello, theory students. Today we're going to talk about when augmented sixth chords get weird. That means they're inverted, respelled, or do unexpected things. We're even going to look at something called the Swiss augmented sixth. So let's get started. Time to put Kermit away here. All right, so what do we know about augmented sixth chords? We know that there are three types that we've studied so far: the German, the Italian, and the French, and they all share the same things: a sharp 4 and a flat 6 scale degree, and the tonic, and they differ slightly with that fourth note. But what happens when these augmented sixth chords get weird? What does it mean to get weird? Well, think about this. Augmented sixth chords are not triads. They're voice-leading chords. So we can't stack them in thirds like we can seventh chords and other kinds of triads. So the first type of weird augmented sixth chord we're going to look at is the inverted augmented sixth. And the word inverted is in quotes because we know that you can't invert it like we can a triad. So what are we inverting anyway? Well, all augmented sixth chords share the sharp 4 and the flat 6 scale degree. You should know this by now. But what would happen if we took this configuration and flipped it around? This augmented sixth now becomes a diminished third. So do we still call it an augmented sixth chord, or do we call it a diminished third chord? Well, we're not going to confuse things. We're still going to call it an augmented sixth, but we're going to surround it with brackets. Those brackets tell us that it's inverted, meaning the sharp 4 is lower than the flat 6. Just like in this example here in E minor. You still have them both converging on an octave, but in this case, you've got the sharp 4 below the 6. And then your other voices, depending on what chord you're dealing with, behave the same way. The first scale degree and the second scale degree for this French augmented sixth chord. But because the sharp 4 is below the flat 6, we are going to put the French augmented sixth label in
brackets.
But what if you were asked to build one of these weird chords? Let's take D minor, a German augmented sixth, with
brackets.
It's simply a German augmented sixth, but in this particular case, you approach that octave in different directions. The sharp 4 below the flat 6. And then you put the tonic, the first scale degree, and then the minor third, the flat third scale degree. And of course, we know that the German augmented sixth often goes to a 1-6-4 before it goes to this 5 chord because of those parallel fifths. The next topic is not really a weird chord, but a weird resolution, something that we wouldn't expect. Here we have an Italian augmented sixth going to a 5 in C minor. But what if that 5 were a 5-7 instead? How would that change the voice leading? Well, let's go ahead and write this as if it were a 5 chord. Again, we have the sharp 4 going to the 5, and we have the flat 6 going to the 5, and we have two scale degree 1s. But this 7th chord is not in this resolution. So what happens is this sharp 4, instead of going up and doubling the octave, it goes down by a half step, from the sharp 4 to the natural or diatonic 4th scale degree, which is the 7th of the chord. Let's look at another example in G minor. Again, let's write this as if we are going to a 5 chord, resolving the augmented sixth out to the octave, and then we have the first and second scale degrees of the French. Well, we know that there is a common tone in the French, right? The second scale degree, and then the root goes down to the leading tone. But who's going to pick up the 7th? Well, it's that sharp 4 going to a natural 4 to pick up the 7th of the chord. I know it seems like it should be moving up, but no, this is how it happens. The next weird augmented sixth chord we're going to look at is something that's not universally accepted in the theory world, but we're going to call it a Swiss augmented sixth chord.
What the heck is a Swiss augmented sixth?
Well, let's take a look. We've already talked about how the Italian, French, and German designators are not really specific to their countries. So why not throw another country in there like Switzerland? Here we have a little map of Europe, poorly drawn by yours truly, and we have in here Italy, we have here France, and we have here Germany, and Switzerland is right in between. So a lot of people say the Swiss looks like a French, but sounds like a German. So what is the Swiss augmented sixth chord? Well, it occurs when a German augmented sixth chord is in a major key and goes to a cadential 6/4. So here's our German augmented 6 in the key of C major. Note that we have a flat third. Now, if we were just going to a 5 chord, that wouldn't present major problems in terms of voice leading, except for, of course, the parallel fifths that seem to bother some composers, but we know are still okay. But in order to get around those parallel fifths, composers often would go to a 1/6/4 or cadential 6/4 before going to that 5. Here's where we run into problems, because in major, the cadential 6/4 has a natural third scale degree. So when you have a flat third going to a natural third, it presents kind of a weird voice leading from the standpoint of a performer. Matter of fact, if they see this in a score, they might even get angry. So what's the solution? The solution is to change that E flat into a D sharp. It's much easier to see D sharp going to E natural. It's much easier to play. Makes you happy. So we can't call it a German augmented 6 chord anymore. We're going to call it a Swiss augmented 6 because that D makes it look like a French, although it sounds like a German. But this only happens in major. Here we have E flat major, and here we have our flat 6 and our sharp 4 going out to the octave. Here we have the first scale degree and the minor third scale degree. So we're not going to do that. We're actually going to change that to a sharp second scale degree, solfege syllable re, and that makes the F sharp to G look a whole lot easier on the eyes than G flat to G natural. And now your performer is happy again. Let's review our weird chords so far. We've had the quote-unquote inverted augmented 6, which we use
brackets.
We've had a chord, augmented 6 chord going to a dominant 7th, where the sharp 4, instead of going up, goes down to the natural 4th scale degree, which is the 7th of the chord. And we have the Swiss augmented 6, which is used in major when the augmented 6, the German augmented 6, goes to a 1/6/4. And that's just a respelled German augmented 6, where we're respelling that flat third to sharp second. This is our last weird augmented 6 chord, the common tone or embellishing augmented 6 chord. We notate it like this, where we don't use
brackets,
but we use parentheses. Now, what does that mean? Well, parentheses in Roman numeral analysis generally mean that you're embellishing something, like the 4/6/4, which we call a neighbor, or the 5/6/4 passing, which both embellish the 1. Well, we can use this German augmented 6 chord, for example, to embellish the tonic triad. The notes don't change, it's just where they go that changes. Look at all this delicious half-step motion that brings out the true character of that tonic triad. Okay, let's play it. Now wait just a minute. I thought that E flat to E natural thing was what made players angry. Shouldn't we make that a D sharp going to an E natural? Makes sense. But wait a minute, if we change that D sharp, we have to call this a Swiss augmented 6 chord, in parentheses, because it's embellishing the tonic. But wait another minute. This sounds very similar to a chord I've heard before. Remember this chromatic neighbor motion from a prior lesson? What if I got rid of that A flat? What would that do to the chord? Well, let's spell it out. D sharp, F sharp, A, C. It's a fully diminished 7th chord. But wait a minute. We can't call it a 7 diminished 7. There's a common tone there. So you guessed it. We're going to call this a common tone diminished 7th. But it's not an embellishing augmented 6 because of that A natural. Remember that the German uses A flat, or the flat 6 scale degree, whereas the common tone uses A natural. Here's what it sounds like. And if we put the A flat back in, it sounds like this. So you can see that the embellishing function of both of these chords are very, very similar. But maybe you want to hear this common tone augmented sixth chord, remember parentheses, not
brackets,
in context. Well, let's take a listen to this example by Tchaikovsky from Romeo and Juliet. In the key of D flat major, this is an augmented sixth chord. The B double flat is the flat 6, and the G natural is the sharp 4. Now the E natural makes this a Swiss augmented. Remember, the sharp second scale degree. In the key of D flat, E natural is a sharp second scale degree. Note how this chord doesn't go to a 5 chord, but rather goes back to the 1 in an embellishing kind of way. Listen to the whole excerpt. It happens twice. We went through this really fast, so make sure you review these weird chords by watching this again. That's all for now. See you next time at the Theory Board.